I want to ask you some questions, right? Before I even go into how we can strengthen our faith, I want to ask you 3 questions, right? These are yes or no questions. And if your answer is no, just, 2 out of these 3 questions, then you need to listen very carefully, okay? And also I need to listen very carefully because I know my answer is no to all 3 of these, okay? So the first question I'm going to ask you is, would you enter or drive in a car that does not have seatbelts or airbags? Would you do that? Yes or no? I wouldn't. So my answer is no. Second thing, would you bungee jump without a harness? Personally, no. I don't want to die. Not yet. Hopefully not. So absolutely not. I'm not doing that. Third thing, would you enter a battle or a war without some kind of protective vest, helmet, and a weapon? Would you do that? Personally, I would not. I would not even be at the war, but it's fine. For the sake of the question, I just would not do it. So if your answer is no to all 3 of these questions, then why do you walk around the world that has so many ideas, concepts, and influences without spiritual armor? What if the biggest thing that is standing between you and the life that you've been praying for is actually you? Well, today we're going to talk about the quiet ways that we sabotage ourselves and how faith and science can give us insight onto how to break those cycles. You're listening to Healthy Hypocrites. This is the podcast where we talk about the messy intersection between faith and science and where we actually expose ourselves and become vulnerable. I'm your host, Tumi, a dietitian and a lactation consultant and a follower of Christ, and I believe that wellness is not about perfection, but instead it's about intention, honesty, and grace. And each week we unpack different topics from different lenses, from a scientific and an aspect of faith, so that we can live a life that is not just perfect, but rather a life that is whole. Okay, so today is a day where we're talking about something very deeply personal and dear to me, because we're talking about self-sabotage, and I'm sure that it can resonate with you guys as well. We're going to talk about those moments where we know what to do, we know we're supposed to do this thing, we know that we want to change, and we start with so much energy, we start with so much motivation, but somehow we slowly drift back. Why are these efforts that we're putting in so short-lived? Why do we stand in our own way? So that is what we're going to dive deep into today and understand that and how we can actually overcome it by looking at support that we get from the Bible and support that we get from science and research, okay? So before we get into this very intricate and very exciting topic, I want us to bring out the confession jar. So I'm going to confess something about self-sabotage, but I want you guys to confess too, because this is a segment about vulnerability. So here it is, the jar that has a collection of very random questions related to self-sabotage and how we can overcome it in a spiritual and scientific aspect. Let's see what today's question is. Okay. So today's question is, what do you find yourself starting and stopping over and over again? Well, honestly speaking, I feel like the answer is quite obvious. As a subscriber to my YouTube channel, you know that I've been starting and stopping this for a long time, right? So the thing that I would say I find myself starting and stopping is actually my YouTube channel. I would post, upload, be consistent, and somehow I would fall off or I would stop, and it would take me months and years to come back. And so it's actually a battle that I'm still fighting even today. So you'll notice, guys, that today we're not necessarily talking about nutrition. So I'm really putting my dietitian hat aside for today's conversation, and really we're just talking heart to heart, me to you, because this is completely not my spec, but I do have a very personal story with this, and I've done a lot of research, insight, a lot of Bible study on this particular matter, so I believe that this can be a very productive conversation for us. So first thing that I need us to do is we need to define self-sabotage. What exactly is it in the first place? So self-sabotage is when our actions do not align with our intentions. So it's almost like we want to grow, but we stay comfortable. We want that discipline, but we're not willing to put the effort that it takes in order to achieve it. We want to heal, but we stay in patterns that are actually keeping us broken. So those are the kind of things that we find ourselves staying in and doing, and where it stems from, or rather the actions that we do to portray these kind of behaviors is things like procrastination. It's sometimes situations where we overeat or undereat, right? It's where we avoid opportunities that are presented to us or opportunities that we come across because we might feel like we're not worthy, or we might feel like we're not ready. It's when we quit something earlier than we're supposed to, even though we said we're going to do the whole thing and see it through. So at the core, when I've seen it from a scientific point of view, self-sabotage is protection. So it is when essentially the brain chooses familiarity over something that is unfamiliar. And this, unfortunately, is even if that particular thing is unhealthy to us or harmful to us. And so when I go back and forth in this topic of self-sabotage, I ask myself, is this human nature? Are we like bound to this because human nature, or is it conditioning? Are we conditioned by our environment, our situation, the people around us in order to self-sabotage? And so I found a powerful part in Romans chapter 7, verse 15, where Paul says, I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but I hate what I hate, I do. So this was Paul speaking, and Paul was a persecutor of Christians. He became one of the most influential apostles. So he spread the gospel, and he wrote actually a lot of the New Testament. And he said this. So he wrestled actually with this internal conflict, this very same internal conflict that we are wrestling with. And so I come back to the question actually, is this issue of self-sabotage human nature, or is it conditioning? And the deeper that I search, I find that it is both. From a scientific point of view, the brain is wired for efficiency and survival. That is the goal of a human mind, efficiency and survival. And so it prefers habits over things that we need to like think too hard about. So it prefers habits and systems, and even if those things are bad, the brain chooses that because it requires less energy. And in the Bible as well, we are taught that we live in a fallen world. Our body is constantly wrestling between our flesh and our spirit, and that tension actually is normal. It is expected. It is obvious. It is apparent. And although it is known that we are going to have that kind of battle, it is not permanent, and it is not permissible as well. We should not fall victims to the fact that those are our circumstances. And so something that I want us to also pay attention to and start to understand a little bit more is the principle in nature, science, and scripture that continues to repeat itself and says that order follows chaos. So a lot of the time we find ourselves in these crazy and messy situations, and then later on we realize that actually I needed to go through that because it led me to this. So that was the chaos that was just before the order that came. And so we see this actually spiritually. It says in Genesis, things began with formlessness and void. And that was the chaos, the fact that there was nothing. And then God brought the order. We see constantly over and over again that growth follows disruption. It's like when we go to the gym, right? When we exercise, our muscles are sore the next day because they have torn apart and need to be filled and repaired. And that is the chaos. But the order that follows that is we're stronger. We have more muscles. We have more definition. We're constantly growing, but we need to break in order to grow. And we also see this in nature. When storms come, they can do a lot of damage. They damage houses. They damage land. Storms are disruptive, they're loud, but they're storms. And they need to happen because they bring hydration to nature, to earth, and they help to restore living organisms, plants, bodies of water. The rivers need to flow. The lakes and the dams and all of these kind of things. So it's like it is a constantly repeated law in nature. And I actually want us to go to Isaac's third law that says for every action, there is an equal but opposite reaction. So what this should remind us is that when we try to change, there will always be some pushback. There will always be that thing that is opposing that particular change that is happening to you. And so that pushback can either be external or it can be internal, but it will be there. And today, as we're talking about self-sabotage, we're going to be dealing with the internal pushback that happens. And so now that we know that it's inevitable, now that we know that it's going to happen regardless, I want us to dig deeper. How can we overcome this? Well, the very first thing that we need to do is recognize it for what it is. Reflect. Think about everything. And really, really think about everything and be honest with yourself. Because sometimes we're not honest to ourselves. Sometimes we lie to ourselves. And if it means that you're going to have to ask someone that you love dearly, someone close to you, where do you see that I'm sabotaging myself? Let them speak. Because sometimes they see things that we don't see. And there are questions that we can also ask ourselves in order to reflect. So those are things like, do I quit when it gets hard? What do I typically quit when it gets hard? What kind of excuses do I make? Are there things where I am delaying to begin with them? Are there things where you keep on saying, oh no, I'll do it next week, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it later, I'll do it next time? Are there things like that? Do you create excuses when you're making progress? Something that I noticed that I would do in the past, and this is honestly my biggest downfall in YouTube, guys, is I was so consistent and I was so resilient with my YouTube channel to the point where I got monetized. And as soon as I got monetized, I relaxed. It's almost as though I was afraid of the progress that I was going to make, or I thought that I had reached the ceiling, or I was afraid that I cannot do more. But I let that paralyze me. And I would say that that is definitely a point where I, myself, self-sabotaged. Do you talk yourself out of opportunities? Do you feel as though you get things that, you could possibly hop onto, things that you could possibly do that would put you 10 steps forward, but you actually ignore them? So what I noticed, or what I've seen, or what I've read as well, is that self-sabotage usually comes right before that breakthrough. Usually it's the thing that you need to do in order to push yourself past the boulder of discomfort in order to reach that new layer of growth. Not to reach the final destination and yes, you've made it. No. To reach that next level and that next step of growth. And so that's why we need to know, what is it? Where is the area where I'm self-sabotaging? Because if we can't define it, we can't defeat it. And if we can't defeat it, we're going to repeat it. And if we repeat it, we're going to be stuck in those cycles that are keeping us the same. And where I want to go now is to Isaac Newton's very first law that says, an object that is in motion will continue in that motion. An object at rest will continue at rest unless acted upon by an external force. And so the lesson here is that unless we intentionally and consistently disrupt our current cycles and make room for the chaos and make room for the trials, we are going to stay stuck, unable to grow, unable to move forward and make progress. And, it brings me back to it's not really a podcast. It was actually a YouTube video that I was watching, or rather listening to, because it's not very visual. It's just really someone talking. And this person is Myron Golden, who I have mentioned in my videos before. Guys, he is fine. I watch a lot of his content. But he was talking about how distraction leads to destruction. And so we're so deceived that on social media, things are always going up and up and up. And, one good thing leads to another good thing and leads to another good thing, because people don't show the way that they self-sabotage. People don't show the obstacles and challenges that they have. A lot of the time that doesn't happen. And so we forget that in order to go up, we need to first go down. And an example that he gave is like a tree. In order for a tree to grow and bear fruit and progress, those roots need to sink into the ground. What first needs to go up, what needs to go up will first need to come down. And so what I want us to also chat about is, fine, let's say we've defined these things that are making us self-sabotage. How are we actually going to overcome them? So I want us to point to a psychology study in 2024 about guilt over success, they say imposter phenomenon, and self-sabotaging habits. And it actually exposed deeper reasons as to why we self-sabotage. And often it's actually rooted in three things. The first thing is fear of success, which caught me off guard because I would think that we are afraid to fail more than we're afraid to succeed. But it's fear of success, guilt, as well as imposter syndrome. And they found that when people feel like they don't deserve the success, they can undermine themselves, withdraw, delay progress, and engage in self-handicapping behaviors. That's what they call them. Okay, so essentially what ends up happening is that we have this anxiety over certain things, and this anxiety leads us to have negative thoughts, and these negative thoughts lead us to doubt ourselves, our own talents, our own capabilities, and our own capacity. And that self-doubt leads us to a point where we avoid and we delay things. And as we avoid and delay, that is the self-sabotage. So it's the cycle that goes, and unless we disrupt it, it's going to continue. It's a loop. So it says it goes with like anxiety, negative thoughts, self-doubt, avoid and delay, and that is the self-sabotage that happens. And so when we start and we pause and we realize the root of this all, the self-sabotage, the reason why it happens, the initial reason is that anxiety. And that anxiety is brought about by your brain that says, hey, no. We need to stick to the program. We need to stay the same. We cannot change. We need to stay with the safe zone. And so that anxiety, and it actually, again, I'm going to reference my Myron Golden videos where he was talking about anxiety and how to overcome it when it comes to, from a biblical perspective. And he speaks about how anxiety is actually wasting current energy on a potential outcome. I thought he was going to say on a potential negative outcome, but on a potential outcome in general. And the way that he described it, like in an example, like a proper example, is you sitting in a car. And instead of sitting in the car, like switching on the engine and going somewhere, you're sitting in the car, you're switching on the engine, you're revving the car until the fuel is empty. You have not made any progress. You have not gone anywhere. And yet you've wasted so much energy. And it's so much easier said than done, but we need to do it anyway. And so essentially, we need to ask ourselves when it comes to this, how can we overcome it? We need to first understand, yes, we know what we're self-sabotaging, but we need to know why. What am I protecting myself from? What story do I believe about myself to be true when I'm doing this? Who told me that I couldn't do this? Where did this start? And so self-sabotage as well is actually linked to self-worth. It's linked to these negative beliefs that someone said something. Someone once said that they don't like the sound of your voice, and so you're scared to make content because of that. Someone once said that your videos are annoying, and so you're not going to make content because of that. Or someone once said that, oh no, you'll never be skinny, and so you're afraid to start that weight loss journey, and you're afraid to actually make the thing happen. And it's based on fear-based thinking, procrastination, and perfectionism. I cannot tell you how many times this perfectionism thing has held me back so much, and it holds me back every day. I mean, like just now, I've been doing the 14-day kickstart that, I'll also link in the bio. And it's been forcing me to post a video every single day. There are days where I was supposed to post this video at 6, and I'm sitting at 11 o'clock and thinking, I don't have anything. But I have a phone full of content. I just need to make something out of it. And so we get stuck and paralyzed in this perfectionism that causes us to self-sabotage. And it is backed by research. It is backed, and it is something that we keep on doing. And so these patterns actually block that long-term progress that we can make. So now let's finally overcome this. Let's finally get through this, right? So after naming it, we need to find the source. So we say, maybe say this with me, or maybe you can write this down and you can practice it, because I've been practicing it. So in different ways. So it says, say, I am getting in the way of such and such when I do such and such because of such and such. For example, I am getting in the way of my weight loss journey when I go to the mall with my work friends because I fear missing out on that experience at work. So it's like we need to start to recognize the pattern, what it is, what it's disrupting, and where this is coming from deeper within. And so we need to challenge this belief. We need to ask ourselves, is this thing true? That this thing that we believe about ourselves, or this thing that we believe to be true as to the reason why we're stopping or self-sabotaging ourselves, is it true? And do I want to be, because sometimes we do things because someone told us a certain thing and it just repeated and now it's cemented in our minds. Now, ask yourself, do I want to be like this person who said this thing? Like the other day, I was actually chatting to my colleague, or let me rather say I was chatting to someone I know, and she, like, in the morning, she had posted this video of herself where she was, feeling good, giving motivation and saying, hey guys, go to the gym, be fit, be active. And she was dancing and she was happy. And we had a conversation about it later on. And she tells me about how her family member said, hey man, you're looking so skinny on that video that you posted. And she was like essentially offloading to me and telling me, hey, this is how I feel. Like, I don't even know how to feel about this comment. Like, this is so weird. Like, why would she say this? And I asked her a question and I was like, how does your aunt look, if I might ask? Like, is she like super thin? Is she big? Like, what is her build? And she, then explained the build of her aunt. So her aunt is obviously like, she has like a mom bod, like she has like she's a chunky, not chunky, but she's just like, she's got a mom bod. And I asked her, okay, so she has said this comment about you. Do you want to look like her? Do you aspire to look like her? And she says, no, I don't want to look like her. I want to look fit. I want to look good. Then that's it. You know your truth, you know your situation, and then that is it. But more than just human approval and more than just self, because this is way deeper than self, we need to actually ask ourselves, does this thing that I believe or this thing that I've been told align with the principles and the virtues of God? Is it true? Does God want me believing this? Does his word align with this belief that I have? And so essentially what needs to happen is that we need to strengthen our faith like it's a muscle in our body. And we often don't think about that. We think that faith is just, you must just have it. You must just have it. You just do have it and you just must have it. But I've come to learn that that is not true. We don't just have faith. It's not like like a pear. I can just grab it and now I have it. It's like a muscle that you exercise and it gets stronger and stronger the more that you exercise it. And I want to ask you some questions, right? Before I even go into how we can strengthen our faith, I want to ask you 3 questions, right? These are yes or no questions. And if your answer is no to 2 out of these 3 questions, then you need to listen very carefully, okay? And also I need to listen very carefully because I know my answer is no to all 3 of these, okay? So the first question I'm going to ask you is the first thing. Would you enter or drive in a car that does not have seatbelts or airbags? Would you do that? Yes or no? I wouldn't. So my answer is no. Second thing, would you bungee jump without a harness? Personally, no. I don't want to die. Not yet. Hopefully not. So absolutely not. I'm not doing that. Third thing, would you enter a battle or a war without some kind of protective vest, helmet, and a weapon? Would you do that? Personally, I would not. I would not even be at the war, but it's fine. For the sake of the question, I just would not do it. So if your answer is no to all 3 of these questions, then why do you walk around the world that has so many ideas, concepts, and influences without spiritual armor? Why do we do that? I ask myself time and time again. And so it's like the world has these ideas, these thoughts, and these opinions that may or may not be in alignment with God. And unless we filter that out, we're going to remain a victim to those words, those ideologies, and those thoughts, and those ideas because we're not firm, because we don't have our own protection, because we don't have our own armor and our own sword. So I want to share with you a few phrases that you can add to your collection and to your armor that can actually help to protect you from the anxiety, to guard you, to heal you, to remind you that that anxiety is definitely not from God. It is from the world. So the first thing that I wanted to bring up is from Philippians 4, verse 6 to 7. Do not be anxious about anything. This helps us to avoid that overthinking, avoidance, and the procrastination. And next thing, do not fear, for I am with you. Isaiah 41, verse 10. Fear is the biggest driver. And when we're scared of so many things. We're scared to be judged. We're scared that we're going to fail. We're scared that we're going to succeed. Another thing is that the Bible essentially tells us is that fearful thinking is not from God. In Corinthians 10, verse 5, it says, take every thought captive. This means that these thoughts we need to control. We are in charge of them. Yes, they're going to happen. Yes, these negative forces or the devil's going to show you things. But if your mind is strong enough and your faith is strong enough and you have practiced and trained your mind and you're able to take these thoughts captive and they're not just free reigning in your mind, unless you do that, then you're going to continue to remain in these self-sabotaging cycles. And so essentially, what happens is that we have these negative thoughts and they leave these emotions in us. They lead us feeling a certain way, and then we take actions. And so if we don't interrupt them, we're going to stay stuck in these patterns. So something that I have watched recently. So I've watched a YouTube video. I don't know the name of the creator. I don't know her name. But she essentially said that what she did is for every negative thought or every negative belief, she found a Bible verse to counteract that and reinforce that positive notion or that positive idea or that reaffirming that, that reassurance. And so she'd write it down and she'd set a reminder every 3, I don't know if it was every hour or every 3 hours, where she would say it, and every single time the alarm went off, she would say it. She memorized it, repeated it, and repeated it, and repeated it. So much so that it became that the way that she thought. And so I think that this is something that we can do for ourselves too. And maybe at first, we might not be so convinced that and might feel like we're just saying it for the sake of saying it. But as we repeat it and repeat and repeat, it becomes cemented in our minds and it becomes integrated in our thought pathways. And it becomes almost like a default setting, a default mindset that we turn to in situations that allow us to apply that saying. And so soon it reflects in the way that we perceive the world, in the way that we speak, in the way that we act, in the way that we live. And then we reach a point where the Bible and those principles actually become our protection. They actually become our armor, to the point where we reach the point where anxiety cannot touch us. And the main thing and the main takeaway that I would say is that God has not given us a spirit of fear. And I'm not making up those words. That comes from 2 Timothy 1 verse 7. Our faith needs to be so strong to the point where we're acting as if it's already going to happen. It's like someone tells you, I've booked a flight for you tomorrow to go to Cape Town. And what are you going to do? You're going to do your hair. You're going to do your nails. You're going to... Listen, you're going to pack your bags, you're going to make sure everything is good because you're going to Cape Town tomorrow. So that's how sure we need to be about the things that we pray for, the things that we have faith in. It's like if you are planning to go from here to Durban and you have a car full of petrol, you have snacks, you have music, you even have, your friends with you, but you don't have a map or some kind of GPS, how are you going to get there? You're going to end up driving aimlessly, endlessly, hoping that you'll get there. Maybe you will. Chances are you won't, So that is how strong our faith needs to be. So essentially what happens is that this is honestly probably not such a good thing or nice thing to say, but if you think you can do it, you're right. If you think you can't do it, you're right. And I'm not making this up. It literally says in the Bible, it says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So this actually tells us that our identity shapes our behavior. And if you believe that I'm not capable, I will always fail, you will act in alignment with those beliefs. And so it means that when you are in a situation where you're presented with the opportunities that are going to change your life, because you believe that you're not going to get there, those opportunities won't even be visible to you. They won't even be applicable to you. You won't even be able to take them or seize them. So it's really, like our mind is a battlefield, and anxiety plants these seeds, whereas negative thoughts water them. And self-sabotage is the fruit of the tree, But when we have faith, what ends up happening is that replaces fear with trust. It replaces lies with truth, and it replaces anxiety with actual, genuine peace. And I want us to remember that self-sabotage, it's not a setback. It's actually the proof that we are really in the middle of a really strong and powerful transformation. And I want it to rather let it lead you to awareness. This talk is supposed to lead you to awareness, so that you can be intentional about the things that we're supposed to achieve, so that we can change and transform and actually grow and achieve the things that are already written down for us to achieve. Let's get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think that's the main takeaway. That is the main thing. If you remember nothing, it's going to be that. And I'm speaking to myself here as well, by the way, because this applies to me, this applies to you, this applies to everybody. If you have any thoughts, any ideas, any input, please comment down below. I would love to hear your take. But you've been listening to Healthy Hypocrites. This is the show where we get real about wellness and grace. And until next time, remember that you do not need to be perfect to be at peace. You just need to be present and intentional. Bye. See you next week, Tuesday at 6.